Good day, colleagues. For some of us, good morning. For some of us, good afternoon. I'm Angelica Namdar, employed by the Antonocom University of Suriname as a lecturer, spatial planning and environment, and as the director of the faculty. For this period, I'm appointed as the coordinator of the regional university network, with which head I will be your host for today's session. My co-host for today is Ms. Sherry Ann Farquharson, knowledge management and capacity development expert at the CCRI. Ms. Sherry Ann will host the Q&A session for today. Um, Welcome to the fourth Regional University webinar. The Regional University Network is a network of excellence for research and education on sustainable energy, with a focus on the enhancement of the knowledge and capacity that is required to support innovation within the sustainable energy and related sectors in the region. The title of today's webinar is Guyana's Energy Conundrum, Opportunities and Challenges. The introduction will be given by Mr. Patrick Kitwaru. Mr. Kitwaru is a lecturer at the University of Guyana. He is also UG's co-promoter for the Joint Master of Science program in Renewable Energy Technology, which is hosted in Suriname and in Guyana, and a former head of the Department of Chemistry. Mr. Ketwaru has a MSc grade in chemistry. Currently, he's doing his PhD research in design and construction of a mobile small-scale torrefaction kiln at the Arizona State University, and he has been involved in the energy sector for approximately 25 years now. Before giving the floor to Mr. Kitwaru, I want to share some few housekeeping matters with you. Please keep your videos off to preserve bandwidth. Also, keep your mic muting during the presentations. We will appreciate if you raise your hand feature if you have a question and wait to be acknowledged before unmuting and speaking. And you may also enter your questions in the chat throughout the session. For this time, I will hand over to Mr. Kitwaru for his presentation. Mr. Kitwaru?
Good day, everyone. I'm very honored to be asked to do this presentation. I am, as you said, I'm the representative of the University of Guyana on this presentation. I'd like to say good day to everyone and welcome. And also I'd like to ensure that I meet all greetings protocols, so all protocols observed, because on this screen you really don't know who we have here. So my talk is about energy in Guyana. So I'll go to my screen. Oh, you have it there. Let me. All right.
Okay. Okay, we can see your screen now.
Good. I think we're there. Right. All right. So this is the title page. So I'll get straight into the overview, and this is basically how the how the webinar will be done. This order I'll do. So it's basically I'll be looking at the Guyanese situation, and the two pictures here are, with the exception of one picture, I think all our pictures are from local, right? So you'll see some interesting scenes from Guyana. Okay, as we know, energy is fundamental for development. It plays such an important role, and it's even also now one of the UN Sustainable Goals, goal number 7 of 17, right? and it's really about goal number 7 is about affordable, reliable, sustainable, and modern energy for all. That's actually the title. okay? And we're looking at access to affordable, reliable, and modern energy services, right? Where that particular subsection is, the main part is access to electricity, which plays an important role. And actually transitions from fossil fuel to renewable, there's a big drive to increase the electrification of all aspects of life. Then we have renewable energy and energy efficiency. If you notice, those last two actually are the last four letters in secret. So it's interesting that we have everything there. The photograph you see here is a biomethanization plant that is done by the biggest rum producer in Guyana and one of the famous rums in the world. This is DDL Eldorado, makers of Eldorado, and those are the biomethanization plants we have behind there. So they're using their waste to produce about 70% energy for the distillery. All right. All right, so basically we have, I'll be looking at two main sources of energy, the traditional fossil-based and renewable. As you know, Guyana has recently become one of the hotspots for fossil fuel oil, crude oil. And earlier this week, I think it was on Tuesday, ExxonMobil announced their 20th find in Guyana. So we're looking at quite a lot of oil in Guyana. And then we also have a significant renewable base, which I'll discuss later on. I will not be talking about nuclear energy because I don't think the Caribbean is interested in that, at least not in the present form. I don't think we can cope with a fallout if we have any issues. All right, so I'm going to look at this issue from a developmental perspective. Not just simply technical, but also from the development perspective. So let's look at the concept of energy poverty. Energy poverty is an older, it's quite an old concept, which was initially used in Europe to define the inadequate domestic fuel access, right? So that would impact things like heating, especially, and the ability to cook. Right, so that was where it initially came. Then it became widened to the global scale where it's tied to instead energy services, right, and the capacity of a community to have access to energy services. Especially now we're getting more into access to electricity because of the flexibility that electrical services has, right? And this has significant impact on human well-being and livelihoods. So there is why do we need energy? Why is energy so important? It's because of the way how it impacts our human well-being and our livelihoods. And then we have access to energy is critical to the quality of life for everyone. And I guess we all know that. You run out of your, you have a blackout and you feel it. You have your gas cylinder runs out of gas and you forgot to get it, you have a problem. So you see how important energy is in every little thing we do, especially now that we're becoming so computerized and we depend so much on the internet and all of that. It becomes even more critical that we have stable, reliable electrical services, right? And the other SDGs, almost every other SDGs, the Sustainable Development Goals, the UN Sustainable Development Goals, are directly tied to having reliable energy. So like health, education, transportation, you name it. You don't have reliable energy, you cannot really perform optimally. As a matter of fact, in some instances, could be downright dangerous. So in marginalized communities, one of the biggest things we find is that energy is not readily available, or it's in insufficient quantities, and maybe not also being available all the time. And Guyana, we have that occurring quite a bit in our hinterland regions, even though we have install quite a number of solar systems or so, they're still limited in terms of what you can do with it. So while it's better than having nothing, there's still certain things we have to look at in terms of what is a sufficiently large enough solar power unit we should be giving to a household and those kinds of things, right? So because you don't have the capability to do so many things, we can relate it to Amartya Sen's freedoms issue with where capabilities affect your freedom as an individual and as in terms of your ability to enhance your life. So that's where you find all of these developmental issues come in, because if you don't have those capabilities, you cannot now develop the way you should. So that's one of the major issues that we have here, where energy comes in, right? So when we look at the sustainable livelihood framework, basically it's people-centered, it's responsive, it's participatory, right? And we have this diagram across here, which shows the interplay between, or I should say, among the various aspects. The most important are the five capitals, right? Capital assets, which are human, social, physical, financial, natural. And you can see energy interacts with all of these in different ways, right? So this is how energy is so central to livelihood, right? So it's important that we recognize that. Having that grounded now in terms of how energy is important, we can then look at the technical and other aspects of energy, which is what I'll be going into shortly. But before we do that, let's look at the Guyana government's commitment based on the 2021 budget. We have transportation. They're going to improve transportation infrastructure, right? Which will mean that you're going to it's going to enhance the use of vehicles and all of that. So therefore, you're going to have to get energy for that. The commitment is to have 10,000 house lots distributed. So therefore, you're going to have to get energy to those households as they build, right? And the government in their manifesto had actually talked about 50,000 house lots within this 5-year term. So we're looking at having to build that infrastructure to facilitate energy to almost greenfield areas, right? In terms of greenfield development. So you could recognize the issues. Then they're looking at approximately 39% increase in mining and quarrying. Good. Increase in forestry activities, enhanced education, enhanced health facilities, and expanded ICT facilities. Now, lots of people don't realize just how much energy ICT utilizes. But when you think about the amount of people charging phones, the amount of people using computers, the amount of networks and routers running, and all the other ISPs, and then you have the cloud. While we don't really have a cloud-based system in Guyana, like we don't have a data bank here in terms of a cloud, right, that use megawatts of power, right? So we need to recognize that although something may appear to be insidious in terms of the apparent usage on an overall scale, it becomes quite large. And that is critical also when you look at energy efficiency. Usually energy efficiency is not recognized as happening, because as fast as you create space, or I should say excess energy from having efficient systems, that space is now, that energy that is freed up is immediately gobbled up, especially in developing countries and developing, because more or less in all the developing countries and communities, there's what we call an energy deficit, in that we don't have sufficient energy to supply the needs. So we never have surplus. So anytime we get surplus, right, it disappears right, into into this demand. Okay. So the national perspective, let's look at the economic contributions in terms of electricity supply. You can notice it from since 2013 to 2020, there's a gradual increase in the in this the amount of money that is being utilized in this sector, right? Nothing too dramatic. Now let us look at the petroleum gas and support services. So this is the oil and gas now. Initially, we had small numbers, right? If you notice, there's a little bit of a bump in 2014 from 2013. And that is when Exxon would have started the drilling and those kind of things. And then if you notice, there's quite a big increase, nearly 3 times increase in 2015, because Exxon would have found their oil in early May. So they were drilling early in the year, right? And then they found the oil and then they started pushing. So we can see this significant increase in the amount of money spent in that. And this is basically in the oil sector. And if you notice, in 2019, it was just just around 20,000 million, right? 20.3, you know, and then suddenly it bumped up in terms of its contribution to GDP to this large number. And this is because we started producing oil in December of 2019. And so we're not only providing services within the oil sector, but we're also producing petroleum. So that's where we get this big bump. And for electricity, there's been a gradual increase. And this increase is more a case of, it's just simply a case, this gradual increase, I would say, is more a case of us not having the capacity to supply this suppressed demand, as there's a technical term that is used, right? The suppressed demand. But because we don't have that, there's this gradual increase in uptake of the energy. All right, so let's look at the big thing, oil and gas. Now, one of the thing is in Guyana, right? As I mentioned, we only discovered oil. We started pumping oil in, extracting oil in 2019, late 2019. And you know, the thing is, we are in this is where the conundrum issue comes in. We are in a very tricky situation right now. There's a very strong international trend of transitioning away from fossil to renewables. And here we are finally hitting the jackpot, right, with oil and gas. But then the world is transitioning away from oil and gas. Now that is an issue. Now, dependent on who you believe or who you would want to agree with, it's either we have 30 years in which oil and gas will still be viable, or 50 years. So we're looking at either 2050 or 2070, by which time most nations would have substantially transitioned away from fossil into renewables. Now, here we have over 8 billion, and this is when they had when they would have found this one, the 18th the 18th discovery. So now we have 2 more since then. So it's quite likely we have much more. And even then, there's still some things that some people that believe the actual reserves are much higher than these, because the last reserve that they found it at a deeper stratum than the earlier reserves. So therefore, maybe under those reserves that we are looking at right now, that were found earlier, if they were to drill through that and go deeper, they may find another layer. So those are some of the things that that would be interesting for the oil companies. But here we are, with only approximately, on the best, from my opinion, from the best outset, 50 years of extraction and trying to make good on this bonanza. So that puts us in quite a quandary, right? Quandary, and so right now with the 20 exploratory wells that were drilled, Exxon is saying that it can support 5 floating production, storage, offloading platforms, right? As FPSOs, right? Currently, now this is only them. We have other people. They also have the Kanji block and the Kaitro block, which they have not really done that much work in as yet. And these are blocks that are contiguous to the Stabroek block, where they have found all of these things. Especially the Kanji block is very close to some of these finds. So there's a very good chance that you're going to get more oil there. So when you look at that, we are there in a good position to have oil for quite a long time. But how do we utilize it? And how do we strategize how we use it? So those are some of the problems we have. Currently, in the pipeline, we have the Liza Destiny, which is producing approximately 120,000 barrels per day. You have the Liza Unity, which is going to be coming in 2022, and the Prosperity, which is in 2024, right? So those are the ones that are on the cards. So this is only 3 of the 5 that we're talking about within the Stabroek block, right? Where they don't have to go and get a new agreement, right? They just simply have to extend for these various FPSOs, but not directly a new extraction license agreement. And then what we're looking at, Guyana now is looking at currently the talk is about a 250 megawatt gas to power facility, right? Now, that if we were to look at what the government is saying, they're hoping to bring this online in about in the next 3 years, right? So there we are, committing ourselves, depending on the nature of the units that they use, and I hope that they're going to use large units and not these small reciprocating engines that I hear some people are talking about. But we should be looking at maybe gas turbines instead, not even steam turbines, gas turbines with heat recovery and those kind of stuff, right? Combined cycles. So so that is it with respect to the oil and gas. So let's now look in terms of the the hydropower. Technically, we have 7,000 megawatts potential. However, the survey was done in the 70s at some 65 sites. Based on what I know, there's some sites that cannot anymore be developed to their full capacity. As a matter of fact, there's one Takwari, I think, which is supposed to be in the Iwokrama Rainforest Conservation Area. And that will never be touched because it's going to flood quite a large area. And I think that's 300 and something megawatts. Immediately, we don't have that. The Upper Mazruni areas also would have, if we tried to develop them, in those days, it would have been quite a large reservoir. I don't think we're ever going to get anyone funding that kind of size plants anymore. So I would say that this is no longer what it is. However, I guess with efficiencies and so we can still harness quite a lot of it. Most of the sites are small to medium scale. And like the Milo Falls, which is maybe one of the most developed large scale project, it's basically just waiting for government approval and funding, and it can go, right? They've already built the Hosororo plant, and this is the spillway of the Hosororo you can see here. Keto is in the process of being built. The Mokomoko was actually a plant um, that was actually, this is in the, Hosororo is in the northwest area of Guyana, region 1. Mokomoko is in region 9, the Rupununi savannas, right? It comes down from the mountains. And this is a 0.5. We actually had, this was up and running a while back, but then we had a landslide after heavy rains, and that knocked out the penstock and killed that particular plant. They're now looking at rehabilitating it. Kumu is also in region 9, but it's closer to Letem, so it might be able to supply them power. Letem is a township within the Rupununi savannas, right? So, but as you notice, most of these are smaller units. They're not so big. So that's one of the things. And then when Guyana has fairly good capability for solar, right? Solar photovoltaic especially. Currently, we have about 1.1 total installed throughout the country, and it's mixed between the hinterland home solar systems, which are between 45 watts to like about 100 watts per solar panel, right? With a small battery and a few and an inverter. So and then, however, there has been, about a while back, within the last, say, 8 years or so, there's been quite a lot of interest in putting up solar on government buildings. So the governments have put on systems in various government buildings. At the Natural Sciences faculty, we have a 100 kilowatt system. And I think, and there's also a smaller system at the Faculty of Technology. So these are the kind of things that we have. And we're also looking at solar farms for the larger hinterland communities, right? And but the big problem with solar is its intermittency. And recently we've had quite a lot of rain in Guyana. And if we were dependent on solar, we would have been in some serious trouble, right? So you have to look at that and be able to combine it. In this photograph here, this is an OLADE-funded project that I was responsible for. What we have, this is at a village called Shulinab. And what we have here is that we have a solar panel up there to solar array up there that is supplying power to that building, which is actually something like a small food processing and commercial entity. And those two white and black things that you see there are actually solar dryers, which I would have designed and had built locally. So they're using it because they have a lot of fruits and meats. They're using it now to hygienically and more efficiently dry their stuff. So that's how this livelihood comes in, and the and developmental issue, because this now within this system, they were able to make over $500,000 within a month after we would have put in some solar freezers, solar powered freezers, to facilitate them being able to utilize their beef that they have, their cattle ranching that they have there. So those are the kind of things that these small little initiatives can go a long way in terms of developing communities. Bioenergy. There are lots of people who believe that bioenergy can actually replace all our fossil fuel requirements on a worldwide basis, right? And that's without cutting down all the trees and all of that, because of the techniques that are available and how and what you can do. The most important source is, of course, the lignocellulose biomass, woody biomass, and grasses and those kinds of things, right? And mainly the way to look at this is waste energy. And the other thing is that we have biomethane. As I mentioned, DDL did something. You can also use small animal husbandry for domestic systems, and commercial. And I would say residential sludge from our sewage systems. We don't have a well-developed sewage system, but what we have is still quite a lot, and that can be utilized for biomethane. What you can see in this photograph here is actually a small demonstration plant at the Albion Sugar Estate, in which they're producing anhydrous ethanol to make ethane gasoline for their own private use at the thing there. So that is that is one of the things that we can look at. And we have bioethanol, second generation. We can look at also biodiesel. We have palm oil in palm oil plantation in the Northwest District, where they have the potential now to do this biodiesel there, right? And so we have quite a lot of potential, but once again, it's a case of being able to utilize it. One of the big problems with a lot of these things is that they're in pockets in different areas. So we have to start looking at utilizing small systems. That's why my work is actually on one aspect of small system, because you have a lot of rice mills that produce rice husks. You have lots of small sawmills and loggers and so that produce all of these things, and that is where we end up not having large enough amounts to. So we have to look at how we address this, and I think this would be relevant also to the rest of the Caribbean community, because most places we have small populations, so therefore you have small amount of waste. There's also another thing that can be looked at, in that we could look at, there's a lot of mined out areas where we can actually now utilize, and I'll come into that later on. Wind. Generally, because of our wind regime, it's not the best. It's not the best prospect in Guyana. Geothermal, technically you could have geothermal anyway if you dig deep enough and you just use the heat of in the ground. So, but this is not being explored right now. I guess maybe after the guys finish drilling there, if we have any land drills, we could maybe or adapt them to start looking at exploring our geothermal capacity. But right now, no, there's not much geothermal. I'm skeptical about wind because while we have a nice regular northeast trades, it's not fast enough. It doesn't have enough energy to really optimize the install capacity of most wind turbines. I would say most wind turbines would work at around 60 or 50% of their capacity at best, of their rated capacity. So you're going to be looking at installing a lot of capacity just to get a certain amount of wind. So it's something that you have to be careful with. All right, synergies and challenges. I'm getting close to the end. Actually, this is my last slide, really. So hydro, solar, and biomass complement each other. I think I spelled that word wrong. Yeah, they complement each other, because what happens is that when it's the dry season, we're actually harvesting our crops, sugar and rice. So you can complement each other, right? And so biomass, and then also solar, right? Potential for floating solar systems on reservoirs of hydropower plants. Now, this is not any pie in the sky scenario. It's basically a very, it's used in India. They're actually covering their canals with that. And there are other places in Europe and so that are now going there. So it's become a mature technology, right? And you're also looking at small biomass system, which I was talking about earlier, which will give grid stability, because if you have a distributed electrical system, then what's going to happen? If you could plug in various energy sources along the way, as one drops off, the other one can come in and all of that. So those are the kind of things that, you know, they support each other, all right? We need to rethink the use of small biomethane systems. most times when people put in a biogas system, as they call it, right, they're thinking about using it to cook with. We need to start, and that's not very encouraging for most people, because it's actually easier to just simply get a cylinder of LPG and you're all right there, right? Whereas if you were to say utilize it to generate electricity, right? Utilize it to maybe run those freezers and fridges that use the heating system instead directly, where they use LPG gas instead, and those kind of things. So we need to start looking at more creative and more useful ways to promote these things. And bioenergy plantations on mined out sites. Guyana has quite a large number of mined out sites, which for various reasons, you don't even want to put agricultural crops on them because you may have contamination. So, however, if you were to use, say, things like elephant grass and other fuel kind of material, like which don't need a lot of energy, don't need a lot of fertilization, and can survive under these harsh conditions, that might be a way to go, and that would also help with issues of erosion and all that, which happens because usually when we have these mined out areas, the guys clean all the topsoil and it takes forever for any vegetation to grow back. You could go 10 years after and still see maybe just a few clumps of grass growing. Our current grid, even as is now, needs to be strengthened and rebuilt in certain areas and extended, especially for the new housing areas. If we're going to put in either the Milo Falls project or the gas to power project, our grid can't take it. We need to be realistic. So that's something that we have to look at. Improve access to funds for small systems, especially small home systems and small farmers and so. Where there are funds, you have to jump through so many hoops in the banks. Technically, I would say from my experience with our banking system, in terms of development projects and so, they're actually very risk averse. We have significant liquidity in the banking system, but the guys are risk averse. So they need to rethink what they're going to do. So that's very important. We need to formalize small grid tie interconnect. So that means I could put up, say, some solar panels on my home and immediately hook into the grid, into the grid, and have this reverse metering system, right? So I get net metering. We don't have that. I don't even know if they have actually formalized the legislation. So that's how far we have to go. Promote solar thermal systems. We're promoting quite a lot of solar PV systems, that we need to promote solar thermal, especially in things like cooling and so. Introduce lithium iron phosphate batteries. They're much more efficient. They're safer, and they in terms of the environment and everything, and they're better than the lead acid batteries, the deep cycle lead acid batteries that we're using currently. So, and that is basically the way I would look at it. And these are my references, the main ones. And thank you.
Thank you so very much, Patrick. It definitely has been an insightful presentation that you have shared with us this afternoon/morning, depending on where you are. And so now I'm inviting my colleagues to share your questions. I know we've already had one question come in, but just to let you know, you can type your questions in the Q&A, or you can raise your hand if it is that you'd like to ask your question, and we'll allow you to unmute and speak. But before we get into with the rest of you, one of my colleagues from the CICRI, Mr. Jean-Michel Parle, energy systems engineer working on the integrated resource and resilience plans, and specifically working with the energy sector plan for Guyana. I'm going to invite Mr. Parle to ask the first question. Jean-Michel?
Sherry, I'm just seeing, can you hear me? Well?
Yes, I can hear you. Go ahead.
Okay, excellent. So yeah, I'm Jean-Michel Parle, Generation Expansion Engineer at the CICRI, and I'm assigned to the Integrated Resource and Resilience Planning Program. And Guyana is obviously one of the countries, as mentioned by Sherry, and that we have going through the program. So in kicking off the Q&A, I just wanted to start by saying, Patrick, thank you for the interesting presentation. I actually enjoyed it quite a bit. Despite working in Guyana, there's a lot of interesting dynamics and activities ongoing in Guyana. I think you captured quite a bit of it. Still even a couple of things I wasn't aware of. So thank you for the presentation. I like the way you launched it. I like the foundation of it, from the importance of energy to our individual lives as well as national development. And the stages you took us through, essentially the trends, the energy potential and opportunities, and most importantly, the challenges and what you call the conundrum, which I think is a good way to put it. I actually wrote down a few questions for you, but I won't monopolize the time. I'll start with one, which is, I heard you spoke to the tremendous opportunity oil and gas is presenting for Guyana, right? And I did hear you mention, if I'm not mistaken, 30 to 50 years, 50 being on the optimistic side. So I'm just wondering if you can speak more about what those estimates are contingent on in your mind, and what risks could materialize which could change that estimate of how long Guyana might be able to benefit from its nascent and its burgeoning oil and gas sector. I'm just thinking, the markets could change. The oil players are making certain decisions right now based on the same trends you mentioned and the pressures they're being put under internationally. And as well, there's lots of different policies, even in Guyana, the Green State Development Strategy, multilateral agreements. Can you just speak to some of that stuff swirling around, the potential lifetime of the oil and gas sector in Guyana, please? I'd love to hear your thoughts. Thanks.
Yes, it's something that I find quite disturbing in many ways. And it's simply because when we look, it's one of those things is that you're looking for something for so long, and when you do find it, you find you can't really enjoy it the way you would have liked to. Why I have given these 2 years? Basically, if you were to look at the larger countries and the larger people, the larger utilizers of energy, and especially fossil fuel, you're looking at China and India. China has more or less said that they are looking at maybe being able to transition significantly from fossil by 2070. India is a little bit more optimistic. They're looking between 2050 to 2060. Now, the thing is, one of the main things with them is that they're still using a lot of coal. So maybe, and you know the issues with coal, the health issues, as well as the greenhouse gas effects and all of that. So as well as the radiative forcing that the particles in the environment that coal push out tend to enhance. So what you're looking at now is that if these countries are looking at not transitioning until then, and they're the 2 large economies of the world, I would say that gives us the outside window to look at it from that perspective. And also because a lot of the things that they're going to be, that people are going to be using ultimately to transition would be things like solar and wind. Not many places have their that amount of biomass and so, right? So they're going to be looking mainly at, especially Europe, at solar and wind. Now we know about the intermittency. So therefore, what we'd have to look at now will be their technology that they're going to be using for storage, right? I don't believe batteries are the way to go, though they're fairly efficient in terms of their capacities and those kind of things. I would go more with hydrogen, and I'm happy to see that some of us are working on hydrogen. I'm a big fan of hydrogen for ages. It may not be as efficient as maybe the electrical storage in batteries. But when you look at batteries now, you have the issues with the resources, the natural resources to build the batteries, right? And getting those materials. And so I'm a chemist, so I kind of relate to that, right? And then when you go to the issue with hydrogen, while the energy balance is not the same in terms of batteries, however, it's a cleaner system. Basically, all you have to do is get your electrolyzers and your excess solar or wind. And we know the problem with places like California, and so they literally pay people to take their solar power off, when they're working. So what happens now is that if they can now put in electrolyzers, and they're now commercials grade electrolyzers, which are coming down in terms of cost and improving in efficiencies. So therefore, if they were to go that way, they can then utilize those electrolyzers. And there's also some new technologies in terms of utilizing captured carbon to produce methane using an electrical process. Now, if they can mature that technology also, there you are. Now you don't have to get rid of your old internal combustion engines, because you can then you have the Fischer-Tropsch scenarios also, that where you can actually produce renewable petroleum using a chemical process. Once again, these things are more energy intensive, but when you have excess energy, if you were to put a lot of solar systems, you have that excess energy, you can now convert it. So I think that those are some of the things that are going to determine how quickly we transition and how long we will take to move away from the oil and gas. So that is my rather convoluted but idea in terms of how I came up to those numbers.
Okay. Thank you, Patrick. Thanks for that response. Interesting.
Okay, all right. I know Jean-Michel has a few more questions, but we have a few other persons in the line with questions as well. I want to share a question that came in from Ruth Pratap Singh from University of Technology, Jamaica. And she wanted to know about the current energy mix of Guyana and how will this be affected by the extraction of petroleum based on the recent discoveries.
Thank you. And I must say greetings to Ruth. We've met a few times, so it's good to, and I was there at her last presentation. Yes, so thank you for the question. Yes, how energy mix. There is a commitment in Guyana to remain on the renewable energy pathway, right? I think we all recognize that we have to keep on that, because ultimately that's where it's going to be. But in the short term, and I would say maybe for the next 30 years, we're going to be more heavily dependent, especially for electricity, on oil and gas. Simply, I don't see the government stopping at 250 megawatts gas plant, as we be dependent on how we would develop as an industrial nation, because you have a lot of downstream things that you can bring off from the gas. And when you look at just one, we were just looking at one FPSO to run that to 250 megawatt gas plant. Now we have 5, right? We could tie them in and look at downstream processing from utilizing the gas. So I would see that we will be fairly heavily dependent for electricity at least. I hope we go for the transportation, these other things go towards the renewable. But I would say that in the short term, that is where we're going to be, maybe next 30 years, given the life of these plants anyhow, because you're not going to be putting in nearly 1 billion US dollar investment and just keep it for 10 years. That doesn't make any economic sense, right? So I'm looking at that just from the economics. If you look at the projected expenditure, you're looking at least 30 years down the road where oil and gas will be our main, will be prominent in our energy mix. I would see the renewables more being used for development in our hinterland regions, right? Because it's you have access and cost to getting fuel there and those kind of things. I can see that way. But in the medium term, no, it's going to be predominantly fossil fuel and gas powered, really.
Okay, thanks, Patrick. So that would definitely be a shift based on I think the policy that's in place had suggested 100% by 2040, as in 100% renewables. Well, that was before the discovery of oil and gas. So that would be an interesting shift in policy based on the economics of the situation. We have another question. This one came in from Graham King, and he was asking, how do you rate the ability of Guyana to avoid the Dutch disease, which is using oil and gas revenues to stimulate holistic sustainable development? How would you rate Guyana's ability to avoid that?
Given Guyana's scenario and our politics and our other social and other issues, I would say we have like a 60-40 that we can avoid it. It depends on how the key players, how mature they are. I feel a lot of them are more interested in power than they're interested in the benefit of the country. So if we put proper legislation in place and we have people with integrity, ultimately the issue is not, it's not the disease is not really because we have oil and gas. The disease is because we have a lot of money and you have people with low integrity. Right. So ultimately, we have to put checks and balances in place, because I don't believe at any time we should assume that someone will have integrity all the time. You always have challenges with that. It's a normal, natural human weakness. So we need to be realistic and we need to have very strong legislations, and also maybe in the beginning ensure that the people who are in positions of authority within the oil and gas sector, like the commissioners and so what, however it's configured, are people who are comfortable with themselves and who have a record of integrity, not just public record, but private record of integrity. I think when you get that, it's more important to have people of integrity than people with technical knowledge. People with integrity can find people with technical knowledge to advise them. So I don't have a problem with that. So that's the way I would look at it.
Okay, all right. Thank you very much for that, Patrick. I have a question. As you looked at renewables for the hinterland, and we do know that electrifying the hinterland communities is definitely a challenge faced by not just Guyana, but a few of our other CARICOM member states. And you mentioned that given that you're in a rainforest, that there would be challenges associated with cloud cover as you look at implementing PV. And you mentioned, possibly some bioenergy, and there are some sites that could benefit from hydro. What do you think would be that ideal mix, though, for the hinterland communities in terms of energy access?
Okay, the thing is that hydro is geography based. So immediately our hydro is based on our geography. So, and unfortunately, most of the places where you have decent hydro sites, you don't have communities close by, simply because of the ruggedness, right, of the sites. So see, the thing is, what people don't recognize, Guyana's geography is not based on the tertiary fold mountain era. Our geography goes back to the quaternary fold mountain area. So they are an older thing. So our hinterland is very badly eroded in the and those kind of things up there, and very rugged, right? It's I remember we were walking through a trail that I had cut from the top of Kaitshore to the Kurubrung with some guys from Harzo Engineering, Montgomery Watson Harzo, and these guys would have been all over the world looking at hydro sites. That's when I was working with the Milo Falls project, and one of the things that the geologists complained about, he said there no two steps are the same. Right, that is how difficult. Every time you're making a step, you have to change your gate, you have to adjust and all that. So right away, the geography impacts the access to hydro, right, and the cost of bringing the hydro power to the community also. So lots of it is going to be where the government will have to eat that cost of installing and bringing it to the community, because I don't think it's going to be commercially feasible for a lot of these sites, okay? especially the smaller sites. In terms of the other forms, I would say the ideal mix, because we have sun and biomass all over the country, right? I would say we should be looking at a combination of the two. And maybe if we want, we can also look at hydrogen storage to help power the biomass systems and the solar system. So I would look at maybe in the short term, you'd have to look at oversizing our PV array and storage, right? So that it takes into consideration the wet seasons. And then at the same time, you look at putting in small biomass systems that are going to be using more like trimmings and so you don't have to go and cut down a whole forest. You just simply go and trim the trees. You know, when you harvest a tree, usually about 50% of that tree is left in the bush. Lots of people don't know that, right? So if you can harvest that, and that is really what my project is all about, is to develop a system by which I can now utilize to treat with those forestry wastes directly in the bush and bring them out in a form that is easily utilized anywhere. So that's the way I'd look at it.
Okay, all right, thank you. Definitely like that perspective. And I think we have time for one more question. So I'm going to ask Jean-Michel. I know you had a couple of follow-ups. I'm going to ask you to ask one of those follow-up questions now.
Yeah, thanks, Sharianne. I'll leave off the camera. So one of the questions was actually on the hinterland. So that's quite interesting, Patrick, your last response. One more that came to mind, you mentioned some challenges on your last slide. And one of them was about the fact that, you know, while there's a lot of liquidity, there's some risk aversion from the financial institutions. But I'm wondering if, you know, with all the opportunities presented by the oil and gas sector, you see any pointed interventions that can be done with the boons that Guyana expects to get? Do you see any, I don't know, something like a risk mitigation fund? Do you see funds from the oil and gas sector being plowed into supporting some of these very important programs for Guyana? For instance, powering the hinterlands, increasing the adoption of renewables, or at least mitigating the risk for those financial institutions to support the average Guyanese person to get involved in the sector. You have any thoughts on that?
Yes, the first thought I'd say is that I don't believe you should be in the financial sector if you're risk averse. So that's the first thing I'd like to say. We don't have, you know, so immediately they're basically just simply bankers. They're not really financiers, right? So that's the first thing. They're not financiers, and I have no bones about it. I tell them that anytime I meet them. So you have no place in that. So why are you are supposed to be taking the risk if you're getting all this interest, right? This high interest, you know what the interest rate is like, good? So if you're taking all this high interest rate and you don't even want to take any risk, I don't see any money can come into this country that will change that from the oil and gas. So I don't see our current makeup of our financial sector unless we get new players who are more project oriented and who really understand the issue of risk and funding risky business, right? I can tell you, we talked to one of the largest companies in Guyana. Well, it's a family-owned company, right? That has its, you know, that does lots of stuff, right? When I was with Synergy Holdings, one of the things that the financiers were saying that would make the project look good is if we could get some local financiers to come and maybe like take in about like 50%, like say 5% equity or debt or something like that. And you know what these people did instead? They were more talking to trying to sell us their services to put together a package that we could sell to somebody else when we already had that. That is what I'm talking about, right? So I don't see them like that. The other thing that we have is that Guyana is actively pursuing utilizing its ecological services and getting paid for that, right? So I think, and that is what a lot of the money is going to be used for these things. So I can also see the government utilizing the oil and gas monies to do that. right, to do that. But I don't see, I would not put any insurance for any banker who's risk averse, right? You're encouraging that, right? And that's my point. I do have no bones about it. It's time we face the realities and let them grow up. If you want to play in the big boys game, grow up and be a big boy. That's my message to the bankers.
Okay, thank you so much, Patrick. Quite a holistic approach to energy access that you have presented today, and looking at improving the lives of persons in Guyana and lessons that can be replicated across the region. Quite the conundrum you have presented to us today, and we thank you for your presentation. I want to thank my colleagues online for joining us today and for your participation in today's session. I think we've had a meaningful discussion, and I look forward to seeing you at the next Regional Universities Networking webinar. And that is going to be on Friday, July 16th, and will be presented by the University of the Bahamas. So I look forward to seeing you then. Before that, you can look out for a meeting request. We want to have a discussion with our colleagues in the university's network about the work program for the run that is getting underway now. Some of you would have heard from Angelica about putting proposals together, and we really want to have a discussion with the wider group on the plans for the 2021 work program and how you can get involved if you are not yet a part of or actively a part of the network. And with that, I thank you for joining us and invite you to enjoy the rest of your day.
Bye.